Buongiorno, faremo questa piccola breve conferenza stampa un po' in italiano, un po' in inglese, ma questa introduzione la faccio in italiano anche perché ieri ho detto le stesse cose in inglese, quindi quello che voglio dire è semplicemente che noi siamo davvero molto orgogliosi di questa evento, mostra, progetto, perché non è definibile nessuno, date queste, diciamo, in modo preciso da nessuna di queste tre categorie. Io credo che quello che Joseph Grima ha portato in Triennale è un modo diverso, un modo nuovo di raccontare l'architettura. Noi siamo come istituzione troppo spesso portati a ospitare mostre che si autocelebrando i loro autori. Invece questa linfa vitale di 32 giovani studi che raccontano in tempo reale attraverso un progetto il loro punto di vista, ci sembra davvero qualcosa che serve a togliere incrostature, a togliere pigrizie, a togliere anche spesso una visione troppo accademica di quello che succede nell'architettura. Quindi credo che questo sia il compito della Triennale. Certamente non dimenticare la storia, certamente parlare dei grandi maestri dell'architettura, ma altrettanto certamente promuovere una generazione di designer e progettisti innovativi. Quindi sono molto contento di questa iniziativa che adesso Joseph ci racconta in modo più dettagliato. Come avete visto siamo in uno spazio che in qualche modo è stato riscoperto. Lorenza Baroncelli, direttore artistico, è qui con me, magari può dire due parole, ma insomma lo vedete anche voi, stiamo iniziato i lavori per tornare ad avere la Triennale che credo Milano meriti, cioè una Triennale che valorizza al massimo la spazialità, pensata da Giovanni Muzio negli anni 30. E questa luce, questa qualità straordinaria di questo spazio dice tutto, non c'è bisogno di dire molto di più. Io ringrazio naturalmente il partner della mostra, Pininfarina, con cui abbiamo cominciato a lavorare e spero potremo presto fare altre cose insieme, che ha condiviso anche lo spirito, come dire, di ricerca e di sperimentazione di questa mostra, naturalmente i nostri partner istituzionali che sono Eni e Lavazza e il partner tecnico ATM. Direi allora la parola a Joseph.
Grazie Stefano. Dico due parole proprio su come si svolge, come abbiamo concepito questo progetto. State of the Art of Architecture devo cominciare con raccontare dove nasce, perché in realtà è un progetto che nasce a Chicago nel 1977 alla Graham Foundation, una delle fondazioni più importanti nella ricerca in architettura, teoria, scrittura, pubblicazioni. Lui tiene un piccolo simposio in cui invita un gruppo abbastanza ristretto, una dozzina di architetti prevalentemente americani, i Chicago 7, che tutti conosciamo, Frank Gehry anche rappresente, alcuni internazionali come Charles Jenks, Sterling anche presente, e attraverso 2 o 3 giorni raccontano, ognuno portando un progetto, agli altri quello che loro vedevano come lo stato dell'arte e dell'architettura, un'occasione per fare il punto su come l'architettura deve reagire a un momento di profondo cambiamento. E sono anche molto felice di dire che oggi abbiamo proprio della Graham Foundation il direttore, Sara Herda, che è qui con noi. Sara è stata una delle forze dietro al concepimento della prima Biennale d'architettura in Nord America nel 2015, come proprio direttore della Graham Foundation, ma anche in qualità di curatore, perché poi lei insieme a me siamo stati chiamati a concepire, diciamo, un framework per questa prima grande mostra internazionale a Chicago. E su suggerimento di Sara abbiamo proposto l'idea di rivisitare questa formula concepita da Stanley Tigerman, State of the Art of Architecture, ovvero chiedere a un certo numero di architetti di portare ognuno un progetto che in qualche maniera fosse l'espressione, quasi una specie di manifesto di cosa per loro significa praticare l'architettura oggi. E questa è stata una cosa, abbiamo avuto anche fra l'altro un contributo di Stefano Boeri Architetti e di tantissimi studi internazionali, quindi è stato un primo momento di riconoscere che l'architettura era cambiata anche in termini geografici, che il dialogo non era più semplicemente nordamericano con altri nordamericani o al limite qualche inglese, ma proprio qualcosa che è fatto di influenze reciproche attraverso l'intero pianeta, quindi più di 100 studi che sono arrivati insieme su Chicago in questo momento di straordinaria energia. E proprio per l'incredibile energia che questo evento ha avuto abbiamo pensato che sarebbe un peccato che questa conversazione nata attraverso un'installazione molto ambiziosa attraverso il Chicago Cultural Center finisse lì. E quindi quando abbiamo avuto l'occasione, grazie al Presidente, anche su suggerimento di Lorenza Baroncelli come direttore artistico, di fare qualcosa che abbracciasse, che guardasse un po' una generazione più giovane, si è pensato che forse questo poteva essere una formula riapplicabile, però ci tengo a precisare che questo è un progetto molto diverso, nel senso che abbiamo immaginato qualcosa, mentre la Biennale di Chicago era molto biennalesca in qualche maniera come struttura, come impostazione, visto il momento anche trasformativo all'interno della Triennale, degli spazi e anche della programmazione, di usare questo come progetto di ricerca su come si può mostrare architettura. Come Stefano ha appena detto, spesso le mostre di architettura tendono diciamo, slittano un po' verso l'autoreferenziale, verso lo statico, e questo modello di State of the Art of Architecture in qualche maniera si presta anche a un tentativo di fare qualcosa di un pochino più performativo. Quindi l'idea che ci è venuta in mente è di rendere in realtà pubblico il processo di allestimento della mostra, di predisporre questo meraviglioso spazio anche come gesto di celebrazione dello spazio stesso, di mettere il meno possibile, predisporre semplicemente un lungo tavolo che attraverso l'arco di 3 giorni diventasse, diciamo, uno spazio di dibattito e di allestimento, in cui l'allestimento diventa una specie di performance, uno per uno. Gli architetti invitati sono invitati a allestire una certa area del tavolo. Diventa un modo anche per esplorare una serie di linguaggi completamente diversi da quelli canonici, diciamo, quelli della fotografia, forse del video e del modello, che comunque sono presenti, ma anche proprio di performance. Ieri abbiamo visto delle straordinarie azioni proprio in cui il corpo stesso è diventato protagonista, che è una cosa piuttosto insolita in molte mostre di architettura. Potete rivisitare, poi stiamo documentando tutto, sarà tutto trasmesso su Instagram, sul Instagram channel della Triennale, e in questo senso è nonché messo sul nostro canale YouTube e disseminato a chiunque altro, messo ovviamente anche nella mostra. In questo senso è anche un tentativo di esplorare le modalità attraverso cui l'architettura può essere rappresentata anche attraverso i canali che sono molto più recenti, come può essere disseminato quasi come una forma di produzione, la mostra come forma di produzione mediatica. Io penso che il modo migliore per farvi capire il progetto è di avviarlo, quindi vi invitiamo a rimanere e a vedere alcune di queste presentazioni. Un'unica cosa vorrei dire, che rispetto all'allestimento, questi tavoli che sono stati progettati da un designer tedesco che si chiama Lukas Wegwerth, che da molti anni lavora su sistemi allestitivi e anche di mobili modulari. Questo in qualche maniera rappresenta un tentativo di porci la domanda su come noi istituzionalmente dobbiamo agire in termini anche delle nostre stesse mostre, come possiamo in qualche maniera proporre un'alternativa a questa abitudine di creare massicci allestimenti molto spettacolari, ma anche molto diciamo wasteful, molto spreco, e invece dotarci di un kit di pezzi che possono essere assemblati, disassemblati, riconfigurati in 1000 maniere diverse, che hanno una loro incredibile bellezza nella loro semplicità, anche come si adattano a tante forme diverse, come anche queste sedute, ma che non cercano di essere il centro dell'attenzione. Quindi come possiamo anche introdurre nella pratica diciamo delle mostre, allestitiva, dell'esposizione, un linguaggio nuovo anche in termini di spazio. Quindi questo è qualcosa che vedrete ricomparire, è un linguaggio che adotteremo sempre di più, ma sotto forme anche sorprendenti, perché ha bellezza anche sua, anche che può essere, lascia comunque spazio all'immaginazione, non è che deve essere semplicemente una serie di tavoli. Quindi con questo io credo che abbiamo detto tutto. Io passerei la parola a Lorenzo Baroncelli, il nostro speaker di oggi, che introdurrà gli studi che presenteranno stamattina. Giusto, sicuramente avete il timetable, abbiamo 2 ore di presentazione, più o meno 20-25 minuti per studio, 4 studi, e poi seguito poi da una discussione aperta. Questa parte si terrà in inglese.
Forse ci sono domande?
Sì, se qualcuno ha una domanda.
Giù rapidamente 2 parole su Back to Muzio. Come vedete questo è forse uno dei gesti più forti di quelli che abbiamo avviato in realtà da quando siamo qui, e quindi è stata la demolizione del laboratorio di restauro che è stato diciamo, poi spostato al piano giardino, e questo nasce un po' dal desiderio di andare oltre la logica di tanti musei che i musei hanno avuto un po' fino ad oggi del white cube, cioè di questo spazio bianco anonimo e con le luci artificiali, ma invece di riscoprire la flessibilità e la monumentalità che il progetto di Muzio incorporava in sé, e che ci sembra una direzione importante da recuperare. Il progetto di Back to Muzio diciamo, lo stiamo portando avanti sotto la guida sotto la direzione artistica di Luca Cippelletti, che in qualche modo ci ha aiutato a capire anche a scadenzare i vari interventi. Non è un progetto che possiamo e vogliamo fare diciamo tutto insieme, è un progetto che accompagnerà i prossimi anni in cui staremo qui, e un pezzetto alla volta ci porterà a riscoprire l'edificio. In realtà ci sono stati già 2 gesti forse piccoli ma molto importanti. Una è stata la riscoperta dello spazio centrale qua della curva, che poi alla fine era sempre un po' nascosto, un po' articolato, era un po' dove adesso c'è la mostra di De Carlo, e con nell'impluvium la riapertura proprio del lucernaio, che era stato chiuso da tanti anni. E questo è solo l'inizio, ripeto, di un percorso che ci accompagnerà per i prossimi 3 anni. Forse partiamo? Ah no, vediamo se ci sono domande.
Direi partiamo. Non è la lista. Laura? Io non ricordo così a memoria. Laura. Hai Something Fantastic. Ok, hai l'avvio, il libricino. Sì. Non ce l'hai.
Non so dove sono.
Sono qui alla fine. Okay, so good morning. I'll switch over to English now. We just, for the benefit of our participants, as you can see this morning, we have an open day for the press, and so we just said a few words about more or less exactly what we said yesterday to introduce the project. So it's a great pleasure to introduce our first speakers this morning. Something Fantastic. I've been following their work for many years, but haven't had the pleasure to meet yet. So this is another of the great benefits of the event, is also to meet many of the people that we're really excited by and interested in. And I think that's in itself of great value, one of the most important things in these kind of exhibitions and events. Anyway, without further ado, Something Fantastic is an undisciplinary design practice aiming to combine a strive for beauty and newness with ecological, social, and political responsibility. The firm was founded in 2010 by 3 architects, and its oeuvre so far includes designing books, exhibitions, furniture, buildings, and urban development schemes, as well as writing, lecturing, and doing art direction. So I think at this stage, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, for this very generous opportunity. Thank you, Joseph, Grima, thank you, Triennale, e grazie per averci invitato. So we brought a project here on the table, and we would like to discuss two things with that project. One thing is the question, maybe I should introduce. I'm Julian, this is Elena, and our third partner is currently, we're representing him. And we would like to discuss two things. One is the question of what does it mean to practice as somebody who studied architecture today, maybe in a different way. And the other thing is what we see at the table, the question of how do we live together now or in the future?
So we're Something Fantastic. We are from Berlin, and we started our office 10 years ago. And just to give you maybe a short status update on us is maybe an interesting point that we've been thinking about lately is that our CV used to say Something Fantastic is a young architecture practice, blah, 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 and we just deleted, or just like not too long ago, deleted the young out of architecture practice, out of the CV, and we realized, interestingly, when you're a young office and you're just starting, a lot of things seem kind of logical. So, for example, you can't shrink, you can only grow. Like, the direction is roughly clear, and we realized that, especially now that we're not a young architecture practice anymore, we have to take decisions even more consciously than before. So, for example, one thing that we've been thinking about and also working on lately is how can we maintain our freedom and independence as a practice? For the simple reason that we believe that architecture and what architects do has great implications and consequences that often go beyond what we can immediately imagine. Like, there's devastating consequences of what we plan and what is then being executed in terms of like use of resources and use of space. We think that maintaining our freedom and independence is becoming a central goal of our practice. Maybe to give you an example, how we're trying to work towards that recently is that since a year we've been working, just the three of us, just the three partners, without any further help in the office, without any employees. We used to have employees before, and whenever a project is or seems too big or like it goes beyond our capacities, we're just working with other offices. And I think that gives us the freedom to take decisions on like if we're taking a project or not more independently. Maybe another example is just a very practical small example. A recent commission that we got through a pitch, quite extensive office renovation. We didn't approach by just going through the regular phases like SD, DD, or the German equivalent, going through different conceptual and detailed design phases, but we asked the client or demanded that we would be commissioned to make an independent study before going into the project, and that study would have to be compensated independently, also independently from what the outcome is. So we wanted to leave it open for us that the outcome could be, does it make sense to invest the money, does it make sense to do the office renovation. The outcome was something in between, like we came out with a quite, I would say, minimal approach. But it was important for us that, obviously, that this for us as an office would be an independent and independently compensated thing. So we would have that freedom to reach that outcome.
So now to the project that you see on the table. We call this project Constellations House. And maybe we there's a movie now in the background. It's just a background. We will maybe talk about or come back to that movie in the background. But what this project is it's a kind of a type of building, of a dwelling, where a group of people can live together in different constellations over a long period of time. Now, for the context, a couple of years ago, we were together with a group of friends who were all families, like young families, or to become families. So at this age, like where we are planning to have a child, or maybe you have one, maybe you want to have 2 or 3. We wanted to somehow live together and found a plot in Berlin in a neighborhood that is kind of a modernist neighborhood with a lot of green and prefab buildings. And we realized when thinking about this situation that we're in, that we're in a moment of our biography where our space demand is actually the highest. So, and that made us think. So the moment when we need the most space of all, like in our lifetime, when we have young kids, that's the moment when we manifest and kind of build houses. That results in a lot of, in the future, underused housing. And that's why, so the Constellation House now is one kind of example of or an approach to a theme that very often comes back in our practice, like this question of how could we, instead of doing something new, how could we better use what is already there? So we have a big discussion right now in Berlin and in many, so maybe to put it in perspective, we're talking from a Berlin, a German, maybe a Western European perspective. But in many of these cities, especially in metropolitan regions, you have a large housing shortage. So it's a great problem to find housing especially for young families. And of course, we also see that we need to build more houses, but on the other hand, we also have the feeling that, that we should use better what is there. And what kind of makes that a bit difficult is that what is there is inside apartments. So it's all these not used children rooms that, I mean, we could refer to our personal stories where our parents still have we both grew up in different parts of Germany in houses where now our children's rooms are used as a computer room or as a storage. Some of them are not heated anymore in winter. But this is a great potential of space that should be used. And in order to, so what this house here is not an answer to how do we use this space now, but this is a proposal of how could we build something now that in the future we can use much more efficiently. And we want to, so what you see here, the Remnants Effect is in urbanism, is that effect that people stay in their houses though they don't need the size of that house anymore. So they remain. Remnants Effect. That's
which is in many cities connected to the fact that rents are rising. So it doesn't make sense to move to a smaller space because your huge space that you rented 10 years ago has in the meantime a low rent.
Exactly. That actually fosters the thing. And then we have here, we try to make a little visualization, a GIF, that indicates or shows in our understanding, and that's maybe now to mention that movie. So this neighborhood here around Karl-Marx-Allee that was built in the 60s, 70s in the GDR is a neighborhood that for many of the kind of settlements that were built in the 70s, either in the East or the West, are now not necessarily the best neighborhoods. That is a little bit also because when they were built, all the people that moved in were exactly those kind of young families that brought a lot of life into these neighborhoods. So there were a lot of kids playing on the street and so on and so forth. But then, because the biographies were kind of similar, also at a certain point, all the kids left. And then who was left there in 2 large apartments kind of maybe also didn't kind of bring that urban life to the street that it had in the beginning. So that is a bit the kind of the attempt to show, okay, this is space, like 3 or 4 bedroom apartments, and the green bar is the occupation. So this question of, how do we use that space that is available? And that's so this is a phenomena that you can see in these neighborhoods. But now going back to, not yet, I would like to show the the rebound also, the rebound effect, because there's another thing that we're kind of that could describe this effect of the problems that come with underused spaces. And it's the rebound effect. So the rebound effect is something that you use in physics to describe that technical evolution leads to more efficiency. Yes, but rebound effect means we use that efficiency to use more. So, for example, we're now all driving in SUVs that have such a higher, they are more efficient per energy that you put in. But they are so much bigger than the cars 50 years ago that it doesn't make any difference. If you look at it like from a larger perspective, we consume more. So technical evolution is eaten away by greater consumption. So in the example of the car, this is a very direct link, you could say. The engineer, the engineer improves the efficiency, and therefore you can have a larger car. In housing, it's not quite the same, because over the last years, our demand of housing is not necessarily growing because we are building more efficient buildings. So buildings that are built now are not necessarily bigger. The problem is that they're always built when our space demand is the biggest, and they are. The problem is that if you look at it globally, our personal per capita space demand rises because we're not leaving the houses. So if you look at these numbers, so for example in Germany, you have a rise over the last 30 years of around from 35 to 47 square meters per person. Then if you look at it a bit closer, you see that a large portion of that rise is actually the senior citizen that live in, still remain in their house. So it's, as I said, it's a bit different than in the car industry because it's not necessarily a gain of wealth or something that you would actually indulge in. You know, it's just space that is there and that you are not using. That's why when we, at this point of being young families, thinking about kind of establishing ourselves, manifesting our situation in cement, we thought about this way of living together, Constellations house. So the idea here is that we break up the kind of the boundaries around the apartment that define also this idea of the nuclear family, like mother, father, 1, 2, 3 children. Like this idea that around an apartment or a house, you have this kind of the one family house.
There's a very interesting article last week in The Atlantic that we're also putting out here to read, which is focusing on exactly that topic.
From a bit American perspective, but I think it is in the Western world more or less everywhere the same. We put it here. It's also, you can also find it online. So the idea of the Constellations house is that we break up this boundary around the apartment and we build only night rooms and day rooms. And
that means we're also breaking up the boundaries or the connections between the individual rooms within the traditional apartment.
And that would allow us, on the one hand, in the moment we're moving in, to be closer together with our friends, so to have a more fluid boundaries around our family, but it would also allow us in like 20 years to live in that same house without refurbishing or without doing anything to the material in a new constellation. That is why it's the Constellations house.
And just to be clear, we are actually stacking two different kinds of floor patterns. We have day floors and night floors, and in the building they're stacked alternating. That means that's what Julian means by like taking apart the parts that usually belong together in an apartment and rearranging them in a different way, allowing for more flexible connections between the rooms. Very practically, a bedroom is not necessarily or not as closely connected to the apartment that it belongs to, which makes it possible to give that bedroom to either another family in the house or to someone from the outside without losing the privacy of your apartment.
And in order to allow that for more community on the one side, we also like put a little bathroom in each of these bedrooms, so you would on the other side have also more privacy, because you could say that maybe to live with like 2 or 3 teenage kids in an apartment is also sometimes a bit stressful, maybe. So you would in a way have a situation that is on the one hand more private, on the other hand more communal, and it would allow you in the future to use it more efficiently. So now, so you see here a night floor with 4 rooms. So that would be 2 of those would be stacked, and then above and underneath you would have a day floor where each family would share, like would have half a floor for that day room. So that means, in our initial idea of like one family living on that floor with their night rooms, they would go up into their day room, whereas the other family goes from their night rooms down into their day room. So there is a moment where you could meet your neighbor on the staircase, which definitely is a different idea. Like, I mean, you would maybe have to adapt your habits of how dressed are you when making a coffee or something. But like that's things that we would kind of do in order to have this kind of flexibility in the long run. And then there's, that would be like 3 impressions of like a day floor, a night floor, and in the middle that staircase, which becomes a kind of a different, like, it becomes part of your house somehow. It's a bit more a domestic staircase. And
it also has an elevator. So these encounters maybe happen much less often than you would think when you look at the plan.
And then, so unfortunately back then we didn't get the plot. We're still in negotiation. But now the plan, and that's now coming back to the question, okay, how do we do architecture with the means that we have, with the tools, and also with the time that we want to spend on that, because we currently have a very healthy work-life balance, and we would like to keep it that way. So we're trying to find partners and approaching partners from the building industry, especially from wood building, because we're like, what you see here is a status of the house like 1.5 years ago. In the meantime, we have planned it and conceptualized it as a complete wooden building, because it's allowed now also in Germany to build much more from wood than it was a couple of years ago. And maybe our favorite partner for that would be Hundertholz. We had the discussion yesterday about cross-laminated timber panels. So this would be that kind of thing, but it's without glue. So it's completely only, it's just wood. And so the idea is that we will approach them, and we will hopefully, because we also realized, we had a discussion with a building cooperative, a communal housing corporation in Berlin that were somehow, they were interested. We have some, through other projects, some connections, they were interested in that. Not just as something that they actually thought they could use that type to densify. That's another discussion we currently have in Germany, like how can we densify in the existing urban fabric? So they thought, and that's how we approached them, and they liked the idea, if they would place things like this in between the existing housing, where people are living in family apartments without being a family, they could allow people to move in those new buildings. They stay in their neighborhood, in their social fabric, but they would kind of, with building a one apartment, you would free a family apartment. So in the end, you have an equation that is really nice also if you look at it economically, because you would free all these family apartments. But we realized, we can discuss that, they were interested, but we have to put a price tag on it. If we don't know how much that costs, they cannot decide, go for it. Like, yeah, so that's what we are currently trying to do. We want to put a price tag on it. And then we will hopefully our idea is that there is a company that produces and a kind of, was heißt zur Verfügung stellen?
Distributes or?
Yeah, distributes this building type to people who are interested in living in such a constellation together. And just as one idea of, yeah, how do you practice architecture today? This is one approach.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Elena. Now it's the time of Romina Grillo. We discovered Romina I think 1 or 2 years ago when she participated to the competition for the Urban Center. We were super surprised by her project. But anyway, Romina Grillo, Liviu, Vasiu graduated at the Architecture Academy of Mendrisio. In 2010, they established their own activity as co-founder of the collective Unulaunu, as well as just the two of them together. Besides their practice, they also acquired teaching experience at Mendrisio, Zurich, Oslo, Bucharest, and Porto.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for this invitation. Thank you. Thank you. Today we would like to talk about a topic that is really, really important for us. And when we think the actual, okay, yeah. When we think the actual status of art, of architecture, we try to focus on what is really matter to us, what is really important for us in this moment as a representative subject for the time changing, and what would be potentially really radical as a topic in this matter. And this reflection brought to us always to the topic of inhabitation. With the modern era, also our way of living become more and more product of the formula economy, function, and times. And the tendency is more and more the one of designing international languages that would kill any specificity, cultural, climatical, or social. Housing is an architectural discipline that is changing very slowly and is largely conservative. it becomes more and more subject of market speculation, and current housing models actually are failing to reflect and to respond to the wider changes perceptible in the society, starting from the structure of family to the population aging or multiculturalism or needs of constant mobility. Changes in the social condition and in the new working models and hours. And this plurality of concepts leads to a high diversity in terms of demands and in terms of individual expression. So as I said, housing is a topic that is heavily influenced by conventions, and forms of dwellings is only changing very slowly. And our goal is the exploration of new, alternative, unexpected spatial configuration grounded in individual and specific idea and vision of living. A subject of reflection of this vast topic is for us the focus of the villas. This typology is something that is very linked to the past, but in the same time it always evokes aspects that were very much linked to the future and to avant-gardes. Especially this typology contains for us two main aspects that are very, very important. First of all, of course, is a living typology, and second is something that is very private, but private intended in the sense that is very personal. So villas are dwellings intended as pure prototypes. Pure architecture. Houses made it more to be shown and to be visited more than to be inhabited. Is a typology that is free from utility, and it records constant technological innovations, new ways of living, and cultural changes in progress, which are always involving a profound development in the conception of private spaces and its relationship with the world. If we look at the history of the client, we would find out that is almost always a progressive and cosmopolitan class, which is staging changes in the conception of living, and which is adopting in the whole or just in part the idea of the avant-garde. Through the history of the typology of the villa, the objective remain always the same. To build a nucleus of urban life in direct contact with nature. And this principle is a principle of freedom which binds the architecture with the territory, and define the ideology of the house as one big environment, one universe, no more separated from nature. Architecture is prolonged in the landscape, and functional attitudes are actually in fact annulled. Villa is the materialization of the ideal place where the human being finds the wild part of himself as an individual. He finds himself in an absolute private dimension where he knows how to be free and emotional. And this is the representation of the locus ammenus, the representation of a vision that explains a clear need of relief from rigid social rules or an escape from universally recognized conventions. Nowadays, it's difficult to talk about the locus ammenus. The new social individual has been fragmented in many, it is a new representation of himself, something that is very fragmentary and very dynamic, and is very rare that is complete in one single social environment. And as a consequence, also the locus amenus is fragmented in many loci that are representing just one of the many environments that our idea is to face. As an exercise, we envisioned a prototype villa in the Roman countryside. And the Roman countryside in this moment was our mental and natural environment for our project. Settled in the hilly landscape, the general layout of the house is crafted between two main spaces, one internal and one external one. Its main internal space is identified by the most domestic moment of domestic life, which is the kitchen, occupying just a small percentage of the entire building, while the rest, the outside space is an undefinable space. Is a living room, is a shelter, a piazza, an outside room, and it's occupying all the rest of the space, sheltered and hosted under this big roof. And where the big roof is the only architectural element representing an unifying character, which physical expression reaches the extreme level to the point that the passage from one side to the other is not possible just through the element of the corridor. The house is intentionally not comfortable in a conventional way, and its architectonical element would make you feel constantly alert and aware, which is the most consistent way to experience nature. These discoveries embodies a set of prototypical elements that we used in a more concrete manner during our first project built in Italy.
The project, it's actually the extension and the refurbishment of 1910 villa, or small villa, in the Piemontese town. Actually, the house is located really at the edge of the urban fabric and facing the fields, the rice fields, and there are close. And being almost one of the last architectural objects that are connecting or that were formally limiting what's, let's call it, bourgeois life towards the city and the hard context of the countryside. Our first ideas when we, the site actually, the site of the villa, it's prolonged. It has kind of a prolonged proportion. This offering the possibility of outside space all around the house, all around the existing house, and this quality pushed us actually to try to develop the project and to develop a sort of inside complete universe between these walls. This detached universe, this detached garden world would make the villa live out of its outside space and vice versa. One of the first thoughts that we had when we visited the site actually was not to have any intention of embellishment or like to concentrate on this, but rather to unveil potential or the raw potential of the house and the garden that was surrounding the house. Our ideas developing the project and our first thoughts were really punctual and also very opportunistic in a way. Probably due to the conditions and the history of the house, the changes that it suffered during the time and the uses of it, it presented a very unusual ground floor organization, and therefore everything what was living area like dining and kitchen were facing a thick wall, and while the back of the house, like a completely closed facade, was facing a garden. This we could see again here. It's kind of difficult with two hands and just two hands. So this would have been the front of the house, and this is the garden. This had as a consequence the fact that we had to reorganize the entire ground area of the garden, of the entire site, leaving essentially the first floor completely untouched. Yeah, this is already the new layout. The core of our intervention was actually a veranda, which was an extension of the living area, a space covered by a roof and 3 carrying elements. Yeah, this we could see here. The space it's glazed on 3 sides. The space is glazed on 3 sides and covered by a V-shaped roof. Which is carried by 3 elements, as said before, like a wall and 2 pillars, one of which is kind of subversively hidden in the fireplace, which we could see here as well. The living space, our desire was, when we saw the site, and because of, as we said before, the condition was kind of unusual, and our desire was to extend the living space beyond the space contained under the roof, and in a conscious way, it grows between the existing house and the existing walls of the neighbor, and while the big glazed elements are sliding along the existing facade and behind the new wall, this actually melts the boundaries between what's inside and what's outside. A second element of our intervention was a stair, which essentially connects the ground floor and the floor above. And it dominates, in a way, the entrance space. It dominates the entrance space of the house. And even though it's kind of almost in the middle of the house, it's completely independent structurally. We opened in the same time. We did a big hole in the wall facing the garden, and by doing so, it connects. And as a consequence, we took away all the walls and other architectural elements that were dividing the space between the new veranda and the new garden. Other architectural elements are developing along the house and in the garden, having as a goal to create a sort of unity, a sort of garden private space all around inside the plot. The project is actually a collection of old elements and new elements working together in producing a possible way of life, of living. Thank you.
Now it's the time of OMMX. OMMX. If you want, there is some space there if you want to pass. OMMX build, draw, and write about architecture. They believe that architectures give form to our collective desire to understand and express who we all are. It can construct intimate portraits of different communities, from individuals and families to companies, landscapes, cities, and nations. OMMX is committed to this biographical process, to creating space that we can relate to and that help us relate to one another. Thank you. Do you need time? Yeah. Okay. I think it's part of Joseph's desire to show the installation of an exhibition that is also around unpredictable moments.
Does anyone have a Mac with an HDMI?
What do you need?
Like an adapter for the HDMI.
Someone has an adapter for the Macintosh? Yes, they have one.
Sorry.
So for the rest of the morning, we are going to have another presentation after this one. Bye.
Hello. So firstly, thank you so much for inviting us to talk about our work. I don't know if you know much about OMMX, so I thought I'd just start by giving a brief introduction. So we're a London-based practice. We've oscillated between 2 of us to 8, and now we're 4 people. We set up in 2010. And, it very much in the wake of the global recession, with affordability crisis and environmental crisis, basically crisis at every front, and a lack of opportunities, I think, for young architects, I think across Europe, I'd say. And so this sort of forum has been super important for us as practitioners to, I guess, start to define how our generation would hope to kind of reimagine the future or question the past. So the project that we decided to show is actually a commission from a younger architect who was inspired by our work and asked us to reflect. I think this is happening all the time at the minute for young practices. They give you a kind of charrette to respond to, and they're like, okay, you've got 2 weeks, 1 week, can you come up with a project that starts to speak about incredibly, all of these themes, whether they're the housing crisis, the loneliness crisis, the identity crisis, all of these different things. And as an office, of course, it's a really, it's a super difficult thing to undertake, but nevertheless, I feel as a young office, it's a responsibility to at least try. So, yeah, we're not showing the built work. Hopefully you can look at that on our website if you're interested later. Yeah, okay, cool. So the original, I should probably mention that the original thing that we were asked to respond to, I don't know if you guys know this film Tango. It's a Polish film from the 80s. It won an Oscar. It was basically this short film of with various people kind of entering a room and their lives completely overlapping. It's kind of this amazing choreography of things. And we were asked to kind of reflect on Cool. We're asked to reflect on and what that could mean for architecture, or how that inspires us, or how we can reinterpret that kind of reference. Yeah, so it was a kind of 2-week project. We knew it was going to be in an art gallery in Poland, and then subsequently the V&A. And yeah, so that's where to start. I guess we began with the question of where to start. And of course, you start at the very beginning when you're a young office and you're hoping to reinvent the world or whatever. And we were kind of, as an office, looking at kind of a very human design. Like, I guess it's a kind of common theme that people have been discussing yesterday and today, but like a kind of very human question of understanding who we are, what we are, why we build, you know, these sorts of things. And we really loved this cave painting. Of course, this is a zoom in in Spain. In fact, I think recently it was actually, there's a hypothesis it was done by Neanderthals and not Homo sapiens, but anyway. But what we found really beautiful was this idea that we all have a compulsion to leave an imprint, to leave a mark, to create some kind of biography, to chronicle our time, to, you know, whether it's friezes on temples through to exhibitions like this. They're an attempt for a generation to speak, I guess, about their lives, their struggles, their daily routines, their rituals, and so on and so forth. But when we thought it became super like powerful and potent is when you understand that this kind of painting happens over thousands of years. You know, it's like each generation finding a kind of collective identity in and amongst oneself, the kind of what's in common, the shared handprint, these sorts of things, our biology. And so we became super interested in this phenomenon and this desire, very human and natural desire, yeah, to, I guess, express who we are and to chronicle our times. Then we're going to skip forward like thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, to this sort of image. I'm sure you're kind of familiar with it. But nevertheless, what struck us is, you know, throughout history, you've always have an attempt to kind of project the world around us, our understanding of the world, onto interiors, to map it. And somehow, whether you're a collector or not, it's, yeah, we all do it. We all collect things. They have meanings to us, whether you inherit, I don't know, your grandmother's sofa once she passes away, or these sorts of things. They're incredibly difficult to shed. And I guess what I'm getting at is we wanted to try and create an architecture that could start to accommodate this human compulsion and this mess and this slight, yeah, and this desire. And then you kind of fast forward even further. And like, you know, this sort of thing, which we all know about, but we're really bad at talking about in terms of architecture. You know, if someone did that to your beautiful front door or whatever, you'd really cry, probably. So on the left is kind of photograph taken of suburbia, of how people have adapted their homes, and how within kind of really, you know, 95% of house building in the UK is just not done by architects at all. It's done by volume house builders. They don't give a shit. But nevertheless, the very virtue of the fact that they, you know, is not really loved means that people feel very happy to kind of customize and adapt and change it and extend it and bastardize it, basically. And on the right, maybe a more familiar image, which is like the teenage bedroom. I don't know if this still happens. Maybe that everyone has laptops now and they don't need it, or they customize their online presence. But this idea that, you know, I don't know how old you guys are. I'm assuming you're quite young and fresh. But, you know, somehow, yeah, it's a really iconic image of just what I think we all do. We live with mess. We need all of these things. And it's part of architecture, and we have to be better at dealing with it and not necessarily always talk about light and space and, you know, these sorts of things. Of course, there are kind of more familiar touchstones, whether it's like reading George Perec or Saul Steinberg's drawings of a kind of cross-section of a townhouse with the house kind of with the elevation peeled off, which I guess you all know and you've all kind of seen and debated at various points. But yeah, we began this project by asking, you know, how can we create, or surely there's an architecture that's, you know, can hold all of this stuff and contain all of this stuff, and how can we embrace it and enjoy it, and how can that maybe become a design strategy? So of course you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. So we started looking at the construction of a London townhouse. It's something that in the UK people obsess about, and they always talk about how infinitely adaptable it is and accommodating and the proportions of the room and so on and so forth. We didn't want to talk about any of that stuff. What we're interested in was just purely its construction. So the fact that it's a kind of masonry front elevation, rear elevation, and party walls, and then timber infill means that by virtue of it being timber, you can just adapt the interior over and over and over and over again. You can change your kitchen, you can make it open plan, you can do this, that, the other. And we really enjoyed that. So, where am I? Sorry. And then, so I think we began the project by just saying, look, there's a huge crisis in architecture about architecture feeling quite static, about what happens when it becomes redundant, can it change, how does it evolve, how does it change, all of these kind of things. There's an environmental agenda for that, and all of these great reasons for doing it, and we just thought, okay, well, let's just take a very London typology, very London kind of typology, let's just abstract it, let's work with the thing that we think works the best, we'll work with the party wall, and then structure a project around this. So just to kind of recap, we're kind of interested in adaptability, in kind of biographies, in affordability, and crucially, we began thinking, okay, well, in the context of a housing crisis, of incredible kind of pressures on land value, yeah, let's talk about a micro home and incredibly dense living. And the conversation in the UK, I don't know about Europe, I can't really speak for the rest of the world, but it's certainly, there's a huge emphasis on talking about co-living, shared space, shared kitchens, shared this, shared that. It's the hot topic. So we just thought, okay, it's been well covered. They're really great architects doing that. We wanted to look at something else. So what we wanted to look at was whether we could take a suburban home, we've all lived, at some point, the majority of people will live in the suburbs for various reasons, whether it's the freedom they afford, the space they afford, the fact that planning regulations are generally a lot, more lax in those sorts of areas. So we take the suburban home and we'll just start overlaying the program. So it'll be can we have the bedroom, the spare bedroom, the office, the living room, the bathroom, the blah, 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 and so on and so forth. And can we just compress that and overlay it and create a small room, but not a micro unit? There's some kind of tension where you're no, this has gone too far. We wanted to create a piece of architecture, not a prison cell. So just thinking about these sorts of themes. And I think it's always a kind of constant battle when you're working through these problems, because it's very easy to reduce these issues into just one theme, whereas for us, we're always trying to weigh up, what's the balance, what feels right. So essentially, the project is based on the London Townhouse. It's got these party walls, and then you probably can't really see this, but maybe in the model it's better. But essentially, the rest is all timber infill. It's timber construction, and the idea was that this would be a kind of seed house that it'd be for 1, 2, 3 people, super small and compressed, and yet you could remove the roof and build upwards, so that the fact that it could take a second story, it can take a third story, possibly even a fourth story, And there's this idea that playing with this tension of micro homes seem to be just for, I don't know, someone who's young in their 20s, and then you move with your jobs, you move with all of this stuff. But also at the same time, we thought it's really good if people can forge roots in a place and really start adapting their home and expanding it on the same plot. And I think that that's one of the advantages that suburbia, and owning a plot somehow is good, that you can change it, you can extend it. And I think it's a very normal thing that people do. The house itself, I'll just talk through the plan, because I'm boring like that, is organized around a spiral, essentially. It's just there's a super small living room, there's a sofa bed that's the sofa's dimension to the size of a bed, there's a small platform here, there's a kitchen that runs along the kind of garden, there's a small study area here, and there's kind of service core here, and there's a kind of party walls, there are 4 units shown. And then once we took this very kind of small space, immediately we were okay, so we've compressed everything, how do we kind of break it? How do we fragment it, and how do we give a feeling of generosity and space so you don't feel like you're going crazy, but somehow, yeah, playing these two tensions off of each other. So perhaps the section is quite useful to see. I mean, crudely, I shouldn't really talk about it, but we just took the section of a suburban home and like pulled it apart so that this side is for one person, this side is for another. There's the kind of street here. There's a kind of bed platform here. It was slightly sunken. There was a garden. But we also did, by using, so in terms of like its constructional language, we're kind of playing with these inclined planes, which at once kind of, I guess, define the various rooms, but also screen you like very intimate moments from like very public moments. So this was a kind of street, and there's the bed like set behind the screen. And also, I'm not sure, like later you can probably have a look, but when you kind of look into the space, the structure of the roof is something that kind of creates the ornament and these sorts of things. Yeah, and so I guess these are just some photos of that kind of interior, of those looking from, let's say, the street, which we've kind of compressed and pulled together, like through. We've deliberately tried to make it as transparent as possible, but that's not to say glazing, it's just to say that this is the kind of structuring and ordering device that we were using. This was the kind of idea that we had for the street, that it became, you know, in a future without cars or this kind of thing, that it just becomes super narrow and super dense. I'm half Japanese, and I'm always kind of, but I never lived there or speak Japanese, but I was always curious about these Japanese homes that are really, you know, on very narrow streets, and they have this kind of screen, and the street kind of almost comes into the interior. So when there are festivals and processions, it can really, the boundaries of the street are really flexible somehow. So we kind of enjoyed that, and we thought that was a kind of nice thing to revisit. And then living with stuff. So yeah, when you look in the model, you'll see we've tried to model as much stuff as we can. We've hidden a huge amount of storage kind of under the floorboards, on the walls. We deliberately made a white model so that people could imagine kind of projecting their life and color onto it. The model. And then finally, yeah, I guess when you kind of work through these ideas and you're quickly kind of brainstorming them, the last step that we find is we kind of just say, okay, well, let's project outwards. Let's think what this might be for the city or a more urban scale proposition. So essentially, yeah, I don't know if you can see it here, but there's a collage of the kind of street grains hitting public squares, more generous moments with kind of public buildings. And, you know, it's just a suggestion of how it might reorganize the suburbs, essentially, in the UK. And yeah, I guess that's it. There you go.
So welcome. Now it's the time of DOMA. DOMA, the platform for equitable housing, is a project founded by Maskim Rocmanico and Francesco Sebregondi in 2017. DOMA was featured in the international publications such as Volume or the Riba Journal, and presented in different cities, including London, Kiev, Amsterdam, Paris, Barcelona, Moscow, Vancouver, Ljubljana, Athens, or Copenhagen. The online game Doma.play was developed in collaboration with Francis Tseng.
Hello. It's good to see all of you, and again, big thanks to Joseph and to Triennale for inviting us. It's very, very good to be here, and very stimulating to share the tables with all of you. I'm going to show a project which is called DOMA, which kind of it's very nice to present it because I don't have to go too far into explaining the problem. It basically has to do with the housing crisis, and I guess we all are familiar with it. Even if it has different shades in different kind of parts of the world, it still kind of has this kind of commonalities that are kind of easy to see in memes, or kind of anytime when we talk to each other, we kind of understand what it means, even if the nature of like the problematics of housing is a bit different. The way it started was when I was graduating from master's. This book came out, which is Thomas Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century, and basically all it does is it kind of eloquently shows that capital, and like if you have access to capital, you get rich faster than people who work. So capital gains are higher than wages. And then there was this paper that came out of MIT, which was basically claiming that housing is a very important part of that. And it was interesting for me because my thesis was in housing, and I also was like closely following architectural discussions about this. There wasn't that much of people talking about it. One of people whose slides I stole is Renier de Graaf, who actually wrote a piece on this. And I mean, basically, it is a well-known fact that real estate is the biggest asset class in the world, and housing is the biggest chunk of that asset class. And we also kind of know that despite the fact that wages are going up, the kind of amount of money that you're allowed to borrow from banks also goes up, therefore. But at the same time, housing prices are going up much, much faster than that. So within DOMA, we also have our own way to look at this. We basically been around different cities and been like kind of working with organizations mostly in Europe, but also a bit in the US and Canada. And we have our own like engine to look at cities and what kinds of parameters of housing market there are there. So basically, if I may speak about DOMA specifically, it is an attempt to kind of, despite the fact that we are architects, it is an attempt to look a bit kind of away from questions of architectural typology and kind of ways to fix this kind of crisis that we are facing within architecture. And instead of focusing on specific objects in the city that we as architects normally are producing, to kind of try to see if there is some sort of urban software, some sort of financial architecture that we could develop in order to kind of better deal with the issues of housing crisis. So, yeah, the way we explain what DOMA is that it's basically a platform cooperative, which is something that is being kind of talked about, especially in Britain. From like, there's Nick Cerniczek who wrote this book called Platform Cooperativism. Anyways, the whole point of DOMA is that it enables crowd-buying of homes, and it deals in a weird way that I'm going to show you with equity in those homes that is supposed to be useful for all of the people, including those who own shares in DOMA and those who rent. Yeah, so basically this idea of a cooperative is an old one. We all know cooperatives. We also all know that the kind of, there are certain issues with those. We actually were working a bit with Undeals, which are this kind of cooperatives in Denmark, and it was interesting to see how under the pressure of the market, basically it's harder and harder for them to scale. So what we're kind of thinking about with DOMA is whether we can kind of somehow use the digital tools and somehow kind of figure out ways to give new strength to this kind of old idea of a cooperative. And it works in a fairly simple way. So we basically divide property into loads of bits, and we sell them to people who are friends and like who kind of support the project. And then the kind of shift is that people who live in the apartments also gain equity for staying there for long. So this I maybe need to explain a bit more in detail. So for example, the city where I currently live and work, Kiev, it has this kind of nature of housing market where if you live in a place for 12 years, you paid enough rent to be able to buy the home. I guess that number is different in all of the cities where you live. In cities like London, it can be way above that. It's close to 25 years. But in any case, there is this kind of sentiment of people who've been renting for long that it's kind of unfair. I've been paying rent every month and I get nothing in return. So we're kind of thinking if there is a way to kind of hijack this existing power dynamics, which basically pits people who have access to capital and who buy homes to rent them and to have stable income and renters, and instead of that to put them into the same community of interest. So, we may speak about all of these nice things about kind of rethinking this kind of one family to one home relationship, or kind of figuring out a better ways for all of us to relate to our cities and to find ownership models that make us all care about buildings more. But in essence, this kind of space frog explains DOMA logic in the most detail. It basically simply puts together residents and stakeholders into the same community of interest by kind of this kind of nature of the DOMA share and how it's designed. And we also have a management company which basically makes sure that all of the transactions between residents and stakeholders are facilitated, and it also manages all the properties. So this is like a super quick introduction to DOMA. I was actually meant to be here with Francesco. He had a last moment change of plans, so he was asking to say hi to all of you. But I'm going to say a bit in detail of how we work, and also I will show the game which we are developing, which also is playable now. And I'll talk about this a bit in the end, which is designed by Francis, this guy here. So basically the approach that we're taking to kind of make DOMA real is this kind of duality between working with systematic and kind of analyzing how DOMA could be working at scale, and at the same time kind of trying to be as real world and granular as we can be by working with a real world example, which is like a one instance of a DOMA property. So actually the DOMA apartment that we are working with will be shown here tomorrow, because also the design practice that I run has a project that is about that, and it also is an exploration about what it means to renovate a home from the perspective of carbon and kind of a couple of other things. So we'll talk about this a bit more. But on the system side, what we're kind of concerned with is how can we understand the implications of something like an alternative financial kind of derivative at the scale of a city. So you can actually, from your phones, you can go to play.doma.city/play. And there's one of the screens here. You can see the map of the city, and you can encounter the DOMA world. But I'm going to talk a bit about back end of this world and how it helps us to design DOMA share or DOMA equity share. So we use the game as a sort of a medium in which we design, and we work with this kind of question of how can we actually design a financial product that is good for everyone. We kind of hear all the time about like subprime mortgage crisis, and it's like presented in a pop culture, even like through movies like Big Short, in a way that like we kind of understand what it is, but we still have this feeling that we're so far from it. As a designers, we definitely don't have any tools to work with it, and in general, it's all about people in Wall Street who can innovate in this space, or whoever those people are. So what we're trying to figure out is if we can somehow figure out a better way to deal with this. And if you think about this, most of housing that we somehow interface with, we access through some sort of legal interface. There is there's nothing in the home itself that says it needs to be financialized, it needs to be the subject of speculation. It's the kind of rules and the system that is around it that makes it such. And again, I strongly feel that we can kind of find ways to design that environment in which homes would work differently. So in order to build this simulation, we collaborate with Francis, who's a programmer, and he basically designs this complex agent-based simulation. So we've built a city that we prototyped around the real city that we prefer to not call, but we basically took all the data from that city. We looked at all of the housing dynamics in that city, history, also predictions. We can look at how like businesses, like banks, how they deal with kind of trying to see what happens in the future. And yeah, we basically populate the city with autonomous agents that interact with each other, and they have their own rules of behavior. And trying to, yeah, we can also design the city the way we like. We kind of, again, try to be as real as possible, trying to maybe replicate some scenarios that we all know about. But again, like we basically work with these charts, which show how the city, how people and how these actors in the city work. And we constantly keep track of whether their interactions and the kind of dynamics of where the city is going seems realistic. So yeah, and I mean, obviously one of the most kind of known dynamic is this kind of supply-demand thing, which means that whenever the prices go a bit too high up, people cannot afford them, and they kind of stop being able to rent homes, therefore they get homeless, so therefore housing prices balance a bit. But we also hijack the existing situation, which basically is modeled around existing dynamics and predictions of where housing market is going, with this kind of tweak, right? We kind of start to see what happens when these autonomous agents start, even those who cannot afford a home, if they have some sort of savings, what happens if they start to pull their resources together, buy homes, and be this kind of force that is kind of going against the normal market dynamics. So when you play the game, you are basically one of these people who kind of fight the landlord class in terms of who can get the majority of the city. Yeah, I mean, we play with all of the kind of parameters that help us to understand how the simulation works and get it close to how the city that we are working with works. Yeah, and this helps us basically to design DOMA equity share in reality. So if you want to help us with that, you can play the game, you can give us your feedback about how it feels. You can also see the little DOMA presentation video on our installation. And yeah, I'm sorry, my presentation is very short, but I'm looking forward to the discussion with all of the morning panelists. So thank you a lot for listening.
So I would invite all the others here on the stage, if you come here. So take your microphone. So maybe Romina can take a seat. So thank you very much to everyone. I think you all speaks obviously about the way in which we live, but also how we can design a new community or a new like citizenship, like starting from the way in which our apartments work and relate to the others. Obviously, you have in some way different approaches. I would say that apparently Romina and Liviu looks like more different because all of them like works on the way in which we can like adapt the apartment to different needs, also related with a very strong relationship with the economics of a city, while you speak about a very different point of view, like the villas, so the single family in a space. But what I think it's a common discussion in between you going ahead is related to the role of the architects on designing and building like a new future for the people that will live in your apartment. And for explaining this, I think that was something that Romina was speaking about, this idea of having a very strong roof, like as a very strong gesture from the architects to like adapt to like design also the family inside the apartment. And this came in my mind, and starting from this came in my mind like a quote from Giancarlo De Carlo that is now in the exhibition there. In a page of his diary, he reflects on his own architecture, and he said, I was designing this apartment with the idea of having a very simple architecture, a very banal architecture, because to give the space to the family to adapt the apartment to their own needs. But at the end, after years, I discovered that my banality was working in a horrible way with the banality of the family itself. And he's closed the diary in saying, should the architects be to give a very strong gesture with their building an apartment instead of being giving all the possibility to the family. So I think that beyond the idea of beyond everything, this is a common line in between all of you, and I would like you to react a little bit on it, because on the first three projects, I would say, the first two projects, I would say, the idea is to leave a complete freedom to the inhabitants. Also, in some way, you works on the idea more of managing or giving tools to the people. But so I would like to. What do you think about the role of an architect in building a very strong or not design?
Maybe I start. I just read an article because you mentioned banality from Lampugnani, which I'm sure, like here in Milan, is also a well-known urban planner. A kind of standing for a kind of a classic idea of the European city and urbanism and so on. But he was talking about banal buildings and how important the focus on banal buildings is. I think it's also something that we are very much interested in, also since a long time in our practice. Not so much the question of like high architecture and the new museum financed by whoever, but the actual buildings in which we are living, the buildings that make up the city. This is what we are more interested in. But in order to, as an architect, to get engaged in that, it's a bit like, I mean, as said, we are currently living or working in a situation or in a mode that we're not aiming to establish a big planning practice that builds lots of nice but banal houses. Somehow that's not our aim. So we're a bit like, we like this kind of more free practice, but still we want to engage with like normal buildings. And yeah, this is one way. But another way is working with what was discussed yesterday, publications, right? It's also this idea that you do something that maybe in the end resonates in another way to our built environment. And maybe you do a book about buildings, or you photograph them, or you do an exhibition. So this is another side of our practice that we still very much enjoy. But we also lately feel somehow a certain urgency to actually put something in, or to do something, to actively engage with the production of the city. And maybe that is also what combines here. I think what you just presented was also very interesting and kind of another level again of how we interact with, as architects, with the production of the city.
But I mean, just to this, like the slide that I showed in the beginning, where there are all this kind of dynamics that, irrespectively of how the buildings in which we live are, how like special or banal they are, the fact how much difficulty that causes to people who occupy those buildings in terms of simply being able to pay rent, and like how many people we know who are those. for me, architecture as a discipline, and like, you know, I like the like RIBA's kind of guidances, because like through them you can see what actually architecture occupies as a discipline in the kind of process of producing that kinds of buildings that are so important for the global economy. Like for me, architecture as it is has no tools to work with it other than like kind of cultural production and like conversations about what else is possible. So, I mean, for us, it's actually a key thing to try to step out of the discipline and see what it produces and what kinds of things it works with. And then, yeah, try to see what are the forces that are really important in terms of producing buildings. So there's this piece by Finn Williams, which was in the Biennale that Jack also produced, which was basically saying that like within existing system, all architects can do is increasingly like design envelopes, because like the program is increasingly being dictated by the econometrics of each site and stuff like that. So again, like from the perspective of DOMA, it's really important to kind of try to see the system as it is in a whole, and see architectural component as one of the forces that makes it, but then look at all of it as a site and then intervene into it from the perspective of what is the most important intervention. I think what all of our presentations shared was this kind of introduction of like, you know, like we live in this world where increasingly it's hard to understand what is the usefulness of what we produce. Yeah, so.
So like what I say sometimes to my students is it's really helpful to sometimes think that you're not an architect, because it grounds you a little bit. And I think for us, I can't really speak for actually John and the others in the office, but certainly for me, I just hope that I designed something that I'd be comfortable putting, you know, my family in, myself in, that feels relevant to me, my friends, and hopefully also, you know, showing wider empathy, like people who don't have access and opportunity to housing. I also think that it's really important that we design cities that are much more representative and diverse of different cultures, of different genders, of different, you know, all of this stuff. And I think that buildings can be banal and they can be super ornamented. They should be as nuts and as wonderfully diverse as we all are, like architects, not architects, you know, all of this stuff. And for me, that's the only way that we can actually develop really, truly plural and inclusive environments. Like, it's as straightforward as that. And the other thing I think is useful to note is that this took me a stupidly long time to realize. But like when you're working with a private client, quite often you're being asked to co-author their space. So you're being asked to design everything to the most minute detail. And it's a discussion, and it's an ongoing discussion where you help create their biography. I think it's something quite different when you're looking at kind of mass production of housing, let's say, where you don't necessarily have those very intimate conversations with every end user. And then you have to think as an architect, okay, well, what's my agency here? I do want to add some kind of dignity, some kind of joy, something a bit, you know, cool, you know, that everyone can understand, that's not too elitist, and that people can project their lives into it, whether that's a banal shell with really good fundamentals about light, ventilation, you know, these sorts of things, or whether it's something, you know, completely bonkers. I think, you know, people, so long as they love their home, you know, I'd be super happy. There you go.
We think we humans, and not only, we really have the ability to inhabit everything, like every kind of space. We don't really have to design anything. At the end, it's just enough to just have a roof, and we would be able to fill it with whatever our needs and personal needs are. And because of that, we believe in kind of specificity in a way, and we would like to bring this through architecture. Of course, it can be throughout your personal objects or to your own sense of humor, I don't know. But we would like to do this already through architecture and architectural elements, and not really think of it as a solving problem recipe or method, but rather in creating a very personal way of or possibility to attach to the space you inhabit. And this is kind of our own interest at the moment.
Maybe one more thing about the strong gesture. Definitely, it's true that we're not interested in making a strong gesture for the strong gesture on a formal level. But I think, although we're talking a lot about the flexibility of use, we are making a very strong, we are making a strong statement. We're asking quite a lot from the people that are deciding to live in a building like we're proposing. Like we're actually asking people to change their lives and to question the way that they're living together as a family. So although we're talking about like flexible use, which is in our case pointing towards a very long lifespan that we're aiming for, I think we are making a very precise gesture, and we're not moving walls or something. This thing is quite rigid. It's the way it is.
So I go ahead with the questions, but if you have something to ask, please feel free to ask. But another question from my side is, okay, you all speaks about the cities, no? And the elements that will that influence the growth of a city. But in your projects, I never see something about the relationship within humans and nature, or with other animals or other species in a city, while we all understand now that the future of our city is bringing back nature inside the urban tissue and stuff like that. So why do you cancel completely this topic from your projects? Sorry, I'm provocative, but just to open a discussion.
No, I think, I think it's a super relevant question. But I think we had the question also yesterday. I mean, the question was, how should we, what trees presented, right? There should be, we probably need more trees everywhere, like on where we grow food, where like
not only trees, also animals, also.
Exactly, but I think it's. I think therefore we need good ideas of how. So in a way, I could argue that a building like that allows for a more efficient use of what we build. On the other hand, also allows to use less kind of intensively other areas. You know, it kind of so. This is definitely a reflection on this question of how do we inhabit Earth, right? Because now, I mean, right now the amount of and we agree there is a housing crisis, but what we see the outcome of that housing crisis is that there is now a lot of people ask for more building land. Where we now, I mean, and we're not building houses on formerly land, like on land that was used for something very valuable, but we use either green areas or we use maybe not so intensive agricultural land and so on. But we're still in Germany, and I'm sure in Italy it's not so different. We're was heißt denn? Asphaltieren. Sealing. We're sealing too much ground. So we definitely need to come up with ideas of how that can all come together in a way. But I have to admit that maybe we're also a bit skeptical about a too kind of naive greenification of some outstanding architectural projects that now do it all together, because we need to change it in a large scale. You know, we live in a time of mass. We need everything. I mean, if we want to change something, we need to change it in a large scale, not just one outstanding little nice project, but we need to find ways of how we can turn over the whole thing. So that's why maybe we're sometimes also a bit, I don't know, maybe in the end it looks so rigid, but it is exactly a reflection on that question of how can we inhabit Earth somehow.
Yeah, but this is exactly also kind of where I would want to go with this in terms of, also this shift that I was describing from focusing on an object to focusing on systems. Because obviously, like we heard from the very first presentation of this whole event from a former agency, I think, that whenever we make something, something is lost, right? And if we start focusing on alternative financial architecture, and also with DOMA, we intentionally focus only on renovating existing properties. And again, like the project that I advertise of Center for Spatial Technologies specifically looks what that means from the perspective of carbon footprint. So in that sense, I mean, of course, like as design projects, we all have to pick our battles and focus on things. But I think this question about general sustainability and relationship with nature, or whatever nature is, it has to be looked at systematic scale.
I believe that we architects, by nature, architecture means take over land and build over land. Of course, we can train ourselves to build better, to build nicer, but nevertheless, we need land to build. And everything we touched, even a park, it's already not nature anymore. It's something synthetic, it's something man-made and manipulated. So I think we can only change this by educating ourselves to not to avoid. I don't think we can avoid the future and avoid the fact that we will occupy everything, but like to prolong when this moment will come eventually. But we see, I mean, the best examples of nature animals reintegrated, or like to really give something to them, were like the disasters like Chernobyl or Fukushima. And these are sites where all these elements are taking over again. And architects are not really able to do something about it.
Yeah, I'm super afraid that the kind of nature will be reintegrated into cities in like very naive, bombastic, kind of Instagrammable ways. I think of like Heatherwick's building with trees and all of this stuff. And, you know, the reality of living with animals is that some are domesticated and others are dangerous, you know. And probably, like you're both saying, you know, we have to be much more self-critical and self-aware of what we mean by nature as architects, and what habitats are, and, you know, whether, I'm not sure I believe in this whole degrowth thing as well, which is a very popular discussion at the minute, because at the same time, I like see people in the UK in like abject poverty, and I'm like, you know, what are the forces that are at play? But yeah, I think that we need to be really careful about how whether it is reintroducing them into cities, or whether we have to safeguard habitats elsewhere much more carefully, about the whole system. I don't think you can do it in a project like at this scale. Yeah, it can be a consideration, but you know, it will be a piecemeal gesture if we suddenly start sprinkling trees like it's parsley. You know, like it's not thought through.
Just a joke. I'll be fired after this, but Stefano Boeri, that is our president, was building this vertical forest, like speaking about the idea of the cohabitation between peoples and animals and stuff like that. But as soon as he see like an insect in his office, it's crazy, you know. He starts saying, help me. So we always joke with him, saying, you project a building to have animals inside an house, but at the end you will never want this.
You always see projects where they're like forests and, you know, all of this stuff, but we're really shit at living with animals. Spiders, rats, like they're all wonderful things. Foxes in London, like people are really like anti them, and it's really sad because those are the animals that can survive and coexist with humans. Raccoons, you know, they're considered pests because they break into our rubbish. You know, like I don't know. I think we need to get beyond rhetoric on these things, and like beyond, you know, selling nature like it's the new buzzword, like sustainability, like blah, 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 prefab. Like architects have this really awful habit, I think, as a profession of doing that and just going with the tide, wherever the tide takes us. I think we just have to be a lot more measured, lean on our previous education at school, about biology, about those sorts of things, and then, and go from there.
First of all, thank you for your presentations. It seems that there is a kind of shared will by all the invited participants to rethink models, right? And to rethink the way we live and the way we found our space, or we found our alternative possibilities. But coming back to housing is quite difficult, and I will try to engage with your commentary regarding mass housing, because on the one side, you have, for example, the cooperative model, which is it works in Germany like as a legal framework, and you can imagine that there is a possibility. You have this tradition in Switzerland, but not in many more countries. You have somehow a tradition of cooperatives in Uruguay and Denmark, but that's it. At the moment, there is currently an exhibition on cooperatives built in Zurich in France, but unfortunately the legal framework for cooperatives is not possible there. So it doesn't exist, so you cannot think in that way. On the other side, you have, for example, Lacaton and Basal with their research on Plus and how to transform mass housing. And then the thing is that talking with them, they said, okay, we did a huge research on this. We did all the cases, like we studied all the cases, several cases Grand Ensemble in France, but unfortunately, there is no politician that was really interested in the research, but actually the recognition came from, the discipline or the academy around the world, but basically the research didn't have any impact until they were able to build one case in Paris, right? So their projects, they are transforming several other projects in France. So what I want to say, it seems that we have several ideas. We have serious, I would say, critical understanding of the conditions in which we operate, and we try to find alternative models. But it seems that we cannot do the whole work, let's say, to design and then to go to a promoter or to a company to find a partner. It's a lot of work. So I'm wondering, in your position, that probably you have constant relationship with institutions, not only cultural, but mainly, for example, as Triennale of Milan. What do you think about the role of the institutions and how perhaps they can be really catalysts in order to continue developing these projects, not only exhibiting them perhaps, but actually to really have the institution as a kind of really mediator between us designers with several ideas regarding possible alternative models, and then the reality, let's say, the building industry or the administrative authorities or planners and so on and so forth. What do you think?
Sorry for starting again, but I think the institutions should and could have a very important role. I think what is a bit problematic sometimes is that in our discipline of architecture, there is still so, I mean, we're all sitting here in this room and there's, I think, some things we agree on, but I think there is also, in the end, a bit different understandings of our personal ambition of being an architect, or what do we want to use the institution for? I think sometimes it's a bit difficult for an institution to make clear what, in the long run, kind of the benefit for whoever maintains the institution, so the government or whoever, what in the long run the profit or the benefit for the common is. And I think I think there is still kind of, it goes a bit in all directions, I have the feeling. So I think you would somehow need to make that clearer as an institution, but maybe also as those who are in the institution, how the work here is in the long run facilitating a change outside the institution. I think it's a great opportunity that we are here together, and I'm really grateful for that. But I think, that is something that we're, at least in architecture, in our discipline, I see sometimes that we all seem to agree, but then in the end, I think we have a bit different understandings. And maybe just to add one more thing, because I had a discussion with students 2 weeks ago, and where it was about politics and the question, how could we kind of engage, or how could we do projects that are, you know, especially in Germany, you feel really strangled from regulations and from the political kind of, from regulations that were made by the politics. But I think in the end, there is a limit to the discipline. And if you want the politics to change, you have to vote and go for the politics. You have to engage yourself in politics, not in your project. You know, I think that's something that, of course, you have to perform in a way that you kind of feel you're not doing the wrong thing, you know, you do the right thing. But in the end, there's a limit to a project. I mean, clearly.
I just wanted to maybe pick up on that. I think that because, and I think I spoke a little bit about this yesterday, is that I think an opportunity like this is also to make ideas public. Because often in the discipline, we're only speaking to each other. There are the limits of schools or more private conversations or journals that may have a more limited reach. And the thing I think to remember about a place like this is that it has different publics. And what we saw in the Chicago Architecture Biennial was like giving a forum to these diverse voices and projects. We really engaged the city and different audiences to come in, and we could see ways in which people had access to the ideas and the people who had the ideas, and then projects kind of took on lives of their own at many different scales. So for instance, one of the participants, Jeannie Gang, reimagined the police station. And she did that in the context of Obama releasing a report that was all about policing, but there was no mention of sort of the physical the architecture of policing. And so she reimagined the police station. She ended up becoming a part of a team in New York that's reimagining the police station. But like the moment it became public and accessible as an idea was in a context like this exhibition. And so that's why I think it's interesting to think about how you use the space of the exhibition, not only to talk to your peers and introduce an idea into the discipline, but really the potential to reach so many different publics and the people that aren't usually at the table with us that could make these projects kind of have more effect, more life.
But to this, I also think it's also kind of important question here, kind of question of language and how we as professionals know how to talk to certain institutional frameworks. So for example, like to your question, there's like, if you look at who produces most of buildings, we all know like that like a normal client for an architect is a developer, and we are trained to speak to developers. We know what they want, we know what their incentive structures are, we know they want to like reduce risks and like increase profits and all that. We know they take money from investors. So I mean, but that's kind of also the whole point of the project that I'm representing, is that like from within these institutional frameworks, we are kind of limited at what we can say. And I mean, for instance, we can see in the US this whole like property tech rise. I think it's like for 10 years, the whole like industry grows like 500%, and there's like massive companies that are now kind of looking at producing housing at scale, like Capita. And I mean, again, like there are architects who are like working with them and like talking to them. But then like, for me, the kind of, the interesting way to talk about like a regulatory political side of things is not to deal with like spatial things within buildings as objects again, but to think about how we work with these institutional frameworks that produce buildings. So like, regulating how investors put money into buildings, what kinds of profits developers make, what the Silicon Valley like property tech kind of led thing, how it changes the way we imagine our cities. And I think again, like for me, this question of language and like you know, we are all here talking to each other. We know everything about like typology and you know like a bit about money and a bit about other things. But like I guess it would be interesting to think together about what are the ways we can again hijack these conversations that are happening actually without us, where most of decisions about how cities currently look are made, and how can we be part of that conversation if that's even possible.
Can I direct my answer a bit more to you? I was just mulling it over. And I was thinking that I can't really speak for a context outside of the UK because I don't really know it very well. But within the UK, what I found is that we have a really bad relationship with risk. We see young architects just as a massive risk, and why would you give them like a £2 million project when, I don't know, there's Surges and Bays, so there's someone else that's more established, that's a small practice or these sorts of things. And we also have a really bad relationship with kind of more ethical questions. Like we like to think, institutionally, I think that we're much further ahead than we are in terms of the way that institutions commission architects and work with them. We don't really work with enough women architects, with people of color, all of this stuff. And I think there's a huge room for improvement that institutions should be doing and taking a long, hard look at themselves and their management structures and always seek improvement, because it's not to like lay blame and be like, oh, you're awful. I think they're improving, but I think the expectation is that we all improve, looking at ourselves as well as fast as we can to catch up with the times. And I live in disbelief, in the wake of Brexit and the last 10 years, watching everything that I held dear kind of unfold, from Weinstein through to race relations, and everything. And I think that institutions, public institutions, whether they're cultural or governmental or these sorts of things, have to take a lead. They really have to lead on these things. And we should hold them to account and push for change. Yeah.
Anyway, I think we are speaking about public institutions in a very generic way, because institutions can be so different levels. So anyway, I don't know if there are other questions. Okay, thank you very much, and see you in 1 hour for the next session.